From one end of the hall came the muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was crying softly, not with anger or petulance or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if crying was something this person was used to, but still they were unable to stop. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing in the direction the crying was coming from. "Oh, pay that no mind, honey," said Granny. "That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that a while. Older man, you understand. Not all there." She tapped her temple. "I understand," Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old, out-of-touch man would wind up at a roadhouse. "Has he been here long?" "A while, I'd say," answered Granny. "Don't really recall how long, though, exactly." "How does he pay for room and board?" she thought to herself. "I guess he doesn't drive," she said to the old woman. "Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car." Granny started at this, looking up with an almost guilty expression. "Oh, well," she said, "that kind of thing is the business of the guests, and I don't ask about such things." She turned the key in the lock of the room she'd led Melinda to and opened the door. Turning on the light, she showed Melinda the quaint little room. Melinda thought it looked like stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have looked modern in the early 50s, at the earliest. Come to think of it, so could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell, and those magazines. I mean, they look new, but... That thought was cut off as Granny put the key in the nightstand and started on with the instructions for the following day. "Now, the bathroom is down the hallway there. You'll be sharing it with the whole floor, so please bear that in mind if you have to go. There's a shower schedule on the door as well. First come, first serve. You just add your name to the first available line, and that's the order the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about that if I were you, though. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and start breakfast. But you come down whenever you're ready, and I'll whip you something up. Oh, and one last thing, my dear. I would strongly advise you not to leave the house until sunup. You just never know what could happen out there, in the dark." "Of course," she replied. "I'd never go out in the dark if I didn't have to." She stopped that train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone, without anything to wear and nothing to shower, brush her teeth, or hair with in the morning. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, which faced front. Her car still sat where she'd left it. The only thing for miles that seemed like part of her world. And an expensive, overly large paperweight, until I can get hold of someone, she thought bitterly. Despite the hominess of the room, she felt an unwillingness to rise and shut off the light. Somehow the thought of going to sleep in this little backward room seemed unthinkable. So instead she continued to sit and stare out the window. As she did, a figure in black detached itself from the shadows of the trees and made its way to her car. What the hell? She jumped up and ran at the window. The figure was tall and seemed to be wearing a cloak made of night. She saw as its arm extended in its hand was a long, jagged dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash mark in the paint and metal. "Hey!" she shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window to open it, but it wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but she couldn't see one. "Hey!" she yelled again. This time the figure raised its head. She could see the glint of 2 eyes under the hood. The figure raised the dagger slowly, determinedly, and pointed it straight at her face. She leaped away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps, dragging, shambling footsteps, and crying. The sound of a person for whom deep, longing sadness was a way of life. Mr. Norris! She waited. Somehow, she just felt that she should let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far, however, she heard other footsteps, these much quicker and lighter, run up the stairs to stop near the door to her room. "Stop it!" hissed Granny Royce. "Go back to your room right now. You know better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully she won't have to see you at all. Now you go on back in there. You got no business being out at this hour anyway." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human that way? Let alone an old man with a foggy mind. She almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped, and waited until the shuffling, crying man had made his way back down the hallway. She heard his door open, and she opened her own just in time to see his foot, shod in a well-worn house shoe, slide into his room. The door closed softly after him. That poor man, she thought. But now she was determined to find out what was going on. The punk outside in the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at an old man, made her begin to understand that not all was well here. She went back down to the front desk area, which was completely unlit except for the moonlight and porch light coming through the window. There was, however, a light on near the back room that Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen, for the moment. But she was determined that it was he that she had seen moving through the trees. He could have killed me! She strode in the direction of the light, seeing that it was the light of the kitchen, and she kept going, expecting to find Granny Royce still puttering about with whatever an old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting with a young man of about 20. He had dark hair and a scruff of stubble, and was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt and khakis, along with a pork pie hat. He looked like he was ready to go sell newspapers on the street corner in the 30s. He was quietly sipping tea while Granny was admonishing him from the other side of the end table. "Now, that's a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh. Talking about my age," muttered the young man with a sneer. "And just how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davidson, you are trouble, young man," she hissed back. Neither had noticed Melinda yet. "One of these days, you're going to say something you'll regret." "Oh, come on, Granny. What could I possibly say that would make things worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at old Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are... hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here." He had just seen Melinda. Hi," she said. She had the distinct feeling she walked in on an old argument that the two of them had had many, many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten for the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed very wrong. "Can I help you, Melinda?" asked Granny Royce. "Is there something wrong with your room?" That brought her back. "No," she said. "The room's fine, but nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse where there seems like nobody ever stops? Why are most of the rooms full, even though mine is the only car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog? And why would you want to make sure I didn't see him?" She got no further before Calvin cut her off. "Good Lord! She's not even been here a night and she can see it. Why did you even let her in, Granny? Why don't you just bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have by now? Lord love a duck." Now there's something you don't hear many young men say, thought Melinda. She decided to ignore Calvin for the moment, otherwise. "And besides that, there's someone out there. There's this freak who slashed my tires. He's been out there messing up my car since then. And you can't even call the police? Are you going to tell me you've never had vandals out here before?" There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny nor Calvin seemed willing to break it. Calvin just scratched at his neck. For the first time, Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked like either a very fresh scar or a slightly healed wound. "Listen, miss, I don't know your name," he finally said. "Melinda," she told him. "Melinda," he repeated. "Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find troubling." Melinda did not like the sound of that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from a sullen child to a serious adult. He looked several years her junior, but he was talking to her like he was her uncle or her boss. He swallowed another sip of tea and sighed. Then he looked her straight in the face and said, "The reason I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, no one in my line of work, would have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream." What are you talking about?" she asked hesitantly. "I worked in a textile mill," he said. "The mill was shut down by the time I got here. Most businesses were. So I struck out on my own, a drifter looking for what little work I could find. And I stopped here. Forever." "Businesses were shut down? I don't understand," said Melinda. "We're having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are still mostly staying open." "Not then, they weren't," said Calvin sadly. "I arrived here in 1929. Melinda blinked, something exploding behind her eyes. "This place was new then," said Granny. "My man and I just opened it, and young Mr. Calvin was a sweet young lad of 16. I'd offered to take him as hired help over my husband's objections. Well, my husband was a well-meaning man, and he knew how to pinch a penny. 'Twas a year after I took Calvin that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been here ever since. And every few years or so, someone joins us." "Yep," Calvin broke in. "Miss Tilly was the first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here pregnant and scared that the man who'd run a trade up in New York was going to find her and kill her. She and that baby." He broke off, now seeming on the verge of tears. "And then," said Granny, "there was Mr. Standish. He was a traveling minister. He doesn't travel anymore." "Mr. Norris got here in '69, said Calvin. "His story is probably the worst. He was a bank robber, you see. Carried a pistol, and he didn't like learning how long we'd all been here." He paused, stood, and walked to the kitchen window. "He tried to leave on his own, you see. Hell, he ain't the first to try. That was me, actually. I warned him not to try it, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside, he met him." "Calvin!" hissed Granny. "We don't talk about this." "She's gotta know," said Calvin. "There's no point in her finding out slowly." "There's still a chance for her," said Granny in a stage whisper. "All she has to do is wait until morning." "She's not going to wait until morning," said Calvin with some remorse in his voice. "No one ever wants to wait until morning. The fact that she came down here is proof enough of that. Besides, what good would that have really done her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here, and there was no phone when this place went up, and there won't ever be a phone here. You know that." "Okay, everyone, stop!" Melinda shouted. "That's enough! Now, you can't keep me prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying any longer. Only that knife-wielding maniac out there is keeping me from running up the road this minute. Now, I need to know what's really going on here, and I need to know now." "We've been telling you," Calvin said. "Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to, because you won't be leaving. Oh, we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out that door right now, but you'll never leave this house again afterward." "Like hell I won't!" yelled Melinda. "Listen, child," said Granny, rising from her spot at the table. "Listen, please. None of us mean you any harm, my dear. Not even Mr. Norris. There's scant he can do any more, and he knows it. That's why he's up there crying all the time. But we're stuck here, all of us. I'd hope there was a chance for you to run for it in the morning, but Calvin's right. There's no guarantee you'd be safe in the morning anyhow." "What the hell is wrong with this place?" choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel the tears beginning to well in her eyes. "It was about a month after Mr. Royce died," said Calvin. "When he came, he was wearing that long black robe and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when I was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him he needed to get out of here because I didn't like his look. He moved so fast, I never even saw it coming. And he got me from here," Calvin touched his neck, "to here." He touched his lower abdomen on the opposite side from the neck slash. He began to undo his shirt, and Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a long, ugly slash that went deep, and was still seeping blood. She could see bone, muscle, and intestines wriggling about in that mangled ruin. "I died that night," said Calvin. "But then, I didn't. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged into the house by Granny, and when I woke up, I nearly scared her to death. She was sure that I was gone. The thing is, I was. But I was awake. I could talk, walk, or do anything I could while alive. Well, except take any enjoyment or nourishment from food or drink anymore. I still drink that tea because it keeps my skin from turning ash gray. I learned that about 50 years ago." "He didn't go away, though," Granny broke in. "I went out to deal with him carrying my axe, but he took my axe and buried it in my back. I won't show you the wound, honey. Calvin should have showed you his either. No one should have to see it." "But that's how he works, Melinda," continued Calvin. "He's got that knife, but if you try to use a weapon on him, he just moves like he does and takes it from you. You never stand a chance. He'll use whatever weapon you try to take him down with to end your life. Mr. Norris learned that the hard way." This isn't happening. Melinda was ready to break down. She had held it together for so long. She had to get out of here somehow. Nothing about this was right. Nothing about it could be real. It was all a dream now. Too much of it didn't make sense. Her father calling her out of the blue, her leaving to hoe to him without a second thought, getting lost so quickly and so irreversibly. No cell phone service anywhere on this road. This place, everything about it. She was dreaming. Yeah, that had to be it. But if so, she was going to survive this dream. She turned and ran for the stairs. Her purse was still in the room, but she was going to grab it and go. She'd had enough. Protesting voices began babbling behind her. She cared not one bit. Mr. Norris was waiting at the top of the stairs. Contrary to Granny Royce's description of him, he was not old at all, no more than about 40. But she saw instantly what she meant by not all there. The top half of Mr. Norris's head looked normal, like a reasonably attractive man with hair peppered gray here and there. His eyes, a clear green, were moist with fresh tears. The lower half of his face was a ruin of bone fragments, shredded muscle and blood. So much blood. His left side was similarly destroyed. His arm hung on by a few hanging strings of muscle, and his hip was just as much of a mess of bone and blood as his face was. He kept his one good hand on the banister as he shuffled toward her. Behind him stood a young woman in a bra and a pair of panties. Her stomach was cut open, and looking out of the wound with bright, intelligent eyes was the mangled remains of a baby. Melinda turned and bolted for the door. Her hand just closed around the knob when Calvin rushed up to her, placing his freezing cold hand over hers. "They're not going to hurt you, but he will. If you step out for so much as a moment, he will kill you, and it will hurt. And it will go on hurting forever. And after a while, you'll learn to function with the pain, but it never goes away." Sobbing, she asked the question she'd been afraid to ask since coming here. "Who is he?" "We don't know," said Granny from behind Calvin. "He just came here and he won't go away. He likes to watch us and do things to incite us to come out again. As soon as someone does, though, he hurts them more. But no matter how many times he kills us, we don't die. Believe me when I say we all wish that we could." Melinda had enough of this. She pushed Calvin away and threw open the door. He was standing on the porch. The knife was held out in front of him, just at face level. Melinda ran into him at a rush, the knife puncturing her right eye and its tip sliding right on through out the other side. She just managed to see the grinning, pure white face of her killer before everything went black. A few hours later, the house erupted with screams from upstairs as Melinda awoke to a world of pain, unlike what she'd never known.